have been working recently over the past 1 week to foil terrorist attacks.
Going to be an
That was
interesting
Israeli
week,
Rear
or
Admiral
maybe
Daniel Hagari, Israeli military
ceasefire.
spokesperson. We wanted to listen in, see if he was saying
But
anything
let's hear
about
the minutiae,
obviously the
the
breaking
devils
news of
and
the
the
hour, which is that
details.
Hamas has approved the ceasefire proposal that was presented to it by the mediators, Egypt and Qatar. I'm going to bring back in Alon Liel, former Director General of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much, Alon, for your patience here. So we were speaking with
Israeli Minister
Hashem,
for
our
Foreign
correspondent,
Affairs,
just a moment
talking
ago,
to
who was starting to
Al
give us
Jazeera.
what
They've just kicked them
he
out.
knows to be the outlines of the deal, right? And this would be a 3-phase ceasefire deal. Each phase would be 6 weeks long. The second phase would include a commitment to a permanent ceasefire. Now, this is major. If true, if confirmed, this is major. And the third phase would include an end to the blockade of Gaza. Again, this is the deal that Hamas has accepted. Israel has not so far. Your thoughts on this, your reaction when you hear this?
Yeah, first, the headlines here are that what Hamas agreed to is not the original deal discussed. So I don't know what it means exactly, but regarding the discussion and the information you just brought about, the key word is permanent. If you will show me the word permanent, and next to the word permanent, the signature of Netanyahu, I think we have a deal. It is hard for me to believe that Netanyahu can ink what you call an agreement that has the word permanent. There is no intention here on behalf of the security elements and the public to end the war with Hamas forever. I don't feel such an intention. So if this happens, it's dramatic. It might be the end of Netanyahu's rule if he agrees to the end of a permanent war in Gaza, or to permanently end the war in Gaza. So hard for me to believe.
So fuck all's going to happen.
I mean, so we are where we've been for the last
Is it a desperate
hour or so,
attempt
is that
to
we
stave
have one
off the
side
attack
agreeing
on
to this
Rafah?
deal, that's Hamas, and what you're telling us, you know, if you allow me to paraphrase, is watch out, be careful, because Israel hasn't agreed. And not only Israel hasn't agreed, but the things that are in this deal, as far as we know it, are things that Israel probably wouldn't agree to.
Can't agree to.
Is that fair?
So first, you understand, I'm not an Israeli official.
No, I understand. But you're
Now,
giving us your analysis as a former diplomat.
if that is the case, and it sounds like it, what is really going on here then?
Looks very reasonable to me. What you included in
Is Israel still going to go in and level Rafah tonight? Which is a strong possibility.
The government is saying, including Gantz and Eisenkot. Gantz and Eisenkot, and I'll tell you, even the parties left to Gantz and Eisenkot do not agree to a permanent end to this war. So if the text will include the word permanent, I'm almost sure Netanyahu cannot sign it.
Okay. Alon, I beg your patience again, because this is such an important moment that we want your voice. I have an update with Al Jazeera's Hashem Ahel-Bara. But again, allow me, Hashem, a little bit of a preamble. Okay, for viewers who are just joining us, it is 17:43 GMT. That means it's close to 9 p.m. in Israel and in Gaza. What you're seeing is the spontaneous manifestations of joy that just erupted about an hour ago, really across the Gaza Strip.
9 bells.
Palestinians streaming out from their homes, shelters, etc., onto the streets, just cheering, applauding the moment they heard that Hamas had signed on to a ceasefire deal. So we continue to watch that with the latest pictures. The sun has set now, so it's nighttime, but we'll bring you the live pictures as well when we get them in. Hashem, what's the latest that you're hearing?
More and more developments, this time coming from Khalil al-Hayya. Khalil al-Hayya is the deputy of Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. He's an extremely powerful senior leader of Hamas, and he's been leading the Hamas delegation recently in Cairo to talk about the aspects of the agreement. Khalil al-Hayya is now telling Al Jazeera, it's really quite interesting, we have to see what happens next and what kind of reaction we're going to get, that the mediators told Hamas that US President Joe Biden is committed.
They stopped a shipment of guns, bombs, and bullets to Israel. America did.
Implemented.
Not got
That
much
word again,
press
guarantee,
at all.
coming from the US.
From the US. This is, so I'm quoting Khalil al-Hayya telling Al Jazeera that the mediators told him that US President Joe Biden said he's committed.
You're being very careful with the wording.
Absolutely. Really
no, and we understand that.
Is evolving over the last few minutes, and we have to really look into the very aspects of the wording that has been now put together in Arabic language.
I've already got two major flashing lights from the words that you're using. I'm hearing personal commitment, and I'm hearing Joe Biden.
Exactly.
And those two things stand out.
The US president told the mediators that he is committed to the implementation of to guarantee the implementation of the agreement, and that he's reiterating what we've been saying a while ago, that it's in phase 2 that there will be a declaration of a permanent ceasefire, and that the exchange of captives / prisoners is going to be throughout the 3 phases of the agreement. Phase 1, phase 2, and then it will be completed by phase 3. And that
It's really
the
simple
agreement
anymore, is it?
includes a clause about a complete withdrawal of the Israeli army from Gaza and the return of the people of Gaza, of the displaced, to their own areas.
I mean, Hashem, this is okay. Let's state a few obvious things, but I think they need to be said. This is important. This is major. This is momentous. This is also one-sided.
Definitely.
Hamas has signed on to a deal. They're telling us what the deal is. Israel has not signed on to that deal. I understand that there's a State Department briefing right now live. Matthew Miller speaking. Let's listen in.
Good stuff.
That we support media freedom all around the world, including in Israel, and that we are quite concerned about this action.
You're quite concerned about this action? Are you asking the Israelis to do anything?
So as the president said on May 3rd, journalists and media workers are an essential part of any democracy, because informed dissent is critical to building stronger and more successful societies, and we will continue to support and advocate for free and independent media around the world. We think Al Jazeera ought to be able to operate in Israel as they operate in other countries in the region.
So you oppose?
We do.
You oppose?
We do.
Okay, all right. Then getting on to, so you've seen these reports in the last hour about Hamas accepting a ceasefire, but also the Israelis ordering or telling people in Rafah to get out.
We will be discussing this.
What's your take on that?
So I can confirm that Hamas has issued a response. We are reviewing that response now and discussing it with our partners in the region.
Looks like it's
As you know, Director Burns is in the region working on it. Would allow increased movement of humanitarian assistance over the coming hours. We continue to believe that a hostage deal is in the best interests of the Israeli people. It's in the best interest of the Palestinian people. It would bring an immediate ceasefire. It would allow increased movement of humanitarian assistance, and so we're going to continue to work to try to reach one.
And so, but you haven't made any determination about whether this is whether they're accepting what is on the table, or they're accepting something that is different.
We have only received the response in the last hour, 90 minutes, and as I said, are going through it now and discussing it with partners in the region. So I don't want to characterize the nature of that response just yet.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Shannon.
Can I follow up on Al Jazeera?
Wait, Shannon, go ahead.
Thank you. There have been some reports that from Israel that perhaps Hamas agreed to a proposal that was put together by Egypt and Qatar that was softer than the initial framework that was in the works last week. Is it possible that there has been a different proposal that the U.S. is not involved with tracking?
So I've seen those suggestions. I've seen some of those reports, and I hope you'll understand that because we are still reviewing the response that has come in, and because we are working on this in real time and trying to reach an agreement, I'm just going to decline to comment on detail about any of those reports. We're going to be discussing this response with our partners in the region in the hours ahead. It remains our top priority to try to reach a ceasefire agreement that will lead to the release of hostages, that will allow a surge of humanitarian assistance both into Gaza and allow it to move around inside Gaza. But I don't want to comment on any of the various reports about what they might have been responding to until we've been able to go through it in detail and come to a full understanding and discuss it with our partners.
And can you say at this point, maybe you can't, but Hamas's political wing and their militant wing, are they on the same page here? Do you feel like this is a response that at least indicates where the entire group is?
I'm just not going to speak for Hamas at all. As we have said for some time, there has been a significant offer on the table. The ball has been in Hamas's court. We have made clear that they should accept that offer, that Israel made significant compromises, showed that they wanted to reach an agreement that would lead to the release of hostages, that would bring an immediate ceasefire, and we have hoped that Hamas would take the deal that was on the table. Now, as to what's in their response, what it looks like, we're going to review that and withhold judgment until we've had a chance to conduct a full review.
Can I ask how the threatened Israeli offensive in Rafah? In the hours before this, there are lots of reports about evacuations, not just reports, but Israel is talking about evacuations from Rafah. How does this, what's the U.S. message of this now? Do you think that Israel should hold off on any operations in Rafah as we discuss this response?
Of course we do. We've made quite clear our position on Rafah for some time, which is that we cannot support an operation in Rafah as it is currently envisioned. We have made clear, the Secretary made this clear in his conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other members of the Israeli government last week, that we have not seen a humanitarian plan that is credible and that is implementable. And we believe a military operation in Rafah right now would dramatically increase the suffering of the Palestinian people, would lead to an increase in loss of civilian life, would dramatically disrupt the delivery of humanitarian assistance, all of which is coming through, I shouldn't say all, but the great majority of which is coming through Kerem Shalom or Rafah and is being distributed inside the Rafah area. If you think about what it would do when you have people moving north to places where internal distribution lines are not currently set up, and you're going to have to try to reestablish those in the middle of conflict in Rafah, we think that would be very difficult, if not impossible to do. So even absent this latest response, we have made clear that we do not support Israel launching a full-scale military operation in Rafah.
Sure. I mean, you just said that in terms of that's the standing U.S. position on this, but has there been any communication with the Israelis about, I mean, in the past hours or so, about the response from Hamas and how this affects the situation in Rafah? Is there a message?
I'm just not going to get into our those conversations. As I said, we just literally in the past hour, 90 minutes, received that response from Hamas in the first place. Of course, we will be discussing it with Egypt, with Qatar, with Israel, the three countries with whom we have been working throughout this negotiation process. But I don't want to get into the timing of those. But obviously, if those conversations have not already started, they will be ongoing in the next several hours. Mayor.
Matt, under the current circumstances, do you still think a ceasefire is achievable based on what you know coming here?
What do you mean? Is a ceasefire achievable?
Like,
a ceasefire is what we are trying to achieve.
Yes, but I mean, over the weekend there was a quiet impasse, and right now Hamas has accepted it. But from Israel, we're hearing that that's not the proposal that we've sent. That's a softened version that throws into the whole thing into doubt.
And I think
I'm just wondering, like, what's your sense?
A ceasefire is absolutely achievable. There has been a deal on the table, a proposal on the table that would achieve an immediate ceasefire and the release of hostages. Now, as for Hamas's response, which I think gets to your question, again, I don't want to characterize it in any sort of detail until we've had a chance to review it in depth and talk with our partners in the region about it.
And one thing on the humanitarian aid, last week when Secretary was in Israel, there was an increased emphasis during his trip on the delivery of humanitarian aid. We visited Kerem Shalom, which got shut down over the weekend after the Hamas attack. But can you give us like a sense of what a Rafah offensive, how that would impact all of Gaza? Because there are issues with distribution in the north. If we have a Rafah offensive in the south, could there be any meaningful humanitarian aid delivery in the north?
So let me just speak broadly to all of Gaza first, and then I'll come to the north. So certainly, a Rafah operation would make it incredibly difficult to sustain the increases in humanitarian assistance that we have been able to deliver over the past few weeks since the president's call with Prime Minister Netanyahu. What happened in the past 24 hours? You have seen an increase in the number of trucks going in through Kerem Shalom. You have seen an increase in the distribution inside of Gaza, including inside southern Gaza. All of that would be put in jeopardy by a Rafah offensive, because obviously, just look at what happened in the past 24 hours when you saw Hamas rocket attacks on Kerem Shalom that led to the death of 3 IDF soldiers and led to the closure of Kerem Shalom. If you had an ongoing kinetic military operation, it doesn't take a genius to figure out the impact that would have on the delivery of humanitarian assistance, not just through Kerem Shalom, not just through Rafah Gate, but of course inside all of Rafah and all of southern Gaza. Now, separate from that, we have been working on standing up additional delivery mechanisms to get aid directly into northern Gaza without having to go through Kerem Shalom. Not because we anticipated an upcoming Rafah operation, but because it's so difficult to get aid through Kerem Shalom and then move it all the way to the north of Gaza. So that's why you saw the opening of Erez Crossing, which is something that the president insisted on and something that we achieved last week when the secretary was there first in Jordan and then in Israel. So you can have trucks move directly from Jordan through Erez Crossing in the north, not have to go all the way to Kerem Shalom, come back up north. You saw Ashdod port opening, so goods can come directly from Ashdod and go in through a northern crossing, and it's why we're standing up the maritime operation. So there will be ways to get humanitarian assistance into northern Gaza directly. We have been working on those because it's important to do so, because we've seen how difficult it is to get aid from southern Gaza into northern Gaza. It's hard to speculate what the impact of a Rafah operation would have on the delivery of that aid to northern Gaza, but certainly you can say without a doubt that it would dramatically impact the delivery of humanitarian assistance in southern Gaza.
Some could argue they're using
going off of that for a second. You said
the skies of bringing in aid
reiterated that the US
as a way of setting up a beachhead right off
full-scale invasion
the coast of
into
Gaza.
Rafah. What about a limited invasion into Rafah?
So I'm not
already
going to
getting
speculate on the
built.
types of military
Talk of British
operations.
troops being there. Talk of American troops being there. All in the name of aid.
So there are proposals that we have put on the table, and this is why I'm not going to talk about some of this publicly. There are proposals that we have put on the table to the Israeli government that we have discussed with them,
which means
that we think would be a much more limited, much more targeted, much more effective way of achieving their legitimate military their legitimate military objectives, which is taking on the Hamas battalions that are remaining in Rafah. Those look very different than the types of operations that we have seen proposed publicly by the Israeli government, and I think I'll leave it at that.
So just to be clear, what you've proposed to them isn't your understanding of what they are planning to go ahead with
worldwide
in the near future?
I'm not going to speak to what they might be planning to go ahead with. I'll let them speak to that. We've seen the announcement they made today about evacuation orders for not entire southern Gaza, not the entire Rafah area, but for a significant portion of it, 100,000 people. And of course, we have concerns that any evacuation at all in such a crowded area, if you see 100,000 people move, you're going to see other people in the next area move as well, which of course is something that you want to see happen if there's a military operation. But the problem now is there's such limited places for them to go inside Gaza, and
this is some of the most interesting
distribute aid to them
you can get,
and make sure they have access to shelter, access to sanitation in the places that they would go if, say, you had hundreds of thousands of people moving from Rafah.
And then, without characterizing the Hamas response, given you guys are still reviewing it, would you say it's a hopeful sign that they have given a response here?
Well, faceless, who knows, but one thing
so I'm going to decline
that is for sure
until we have completed that review.
And when do you think you'll be able to complete that review? When should we expect an
Americans, the British,
the
West,
Burns, as I said, is in the region, literally working on this right now.
The ability to land
I don't want to put a timetable on it, but it's something that is a top priority for everyone in this administration, from the president on down. You saw that the president had a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu today. Achieving a ceasefire deal that would lead to release of hostages was one of the top priorities of the Secretary's trip when he was in the region last week. So everyone is focused on this. Everyone is trying to get a deal over the line.
on the people who may say yeah or
Last
nay
week
to
there was some
this?
reporting that the Biden administration had put a hold on a shipment of US-made ammunition to Israel. Have you seen that report? Can you comment on its accuracy?
I have seen on that report, as is usually the case, we don't comment on specific cases of arms transfers, and I'm not going to do so here. Yeah, Saeed.
Just to clarify on the offer that you said was generous and on the table and what seems to be accepted now. Does that mean that the ball is no longer in Hamas's court?
Saeed, it's impossible for me to answer that question without characterizing the response that Hamas has given, which I'm not yet willing to do.
Okay, all right. On Al Jazeera, now we know that Israel is accusing the correspondents of Al Jazeera, our colleague, who are Israeli citizens, by the way, accusing them of incitement that goes back many years and all these things, a crime that is punishable by imprisonment. Are you worried that these correspondents might actually be imprisoned by the Israelis? And if they are, what would the government of the United States do?
So I'm not going to speak to those specific allegations. It's not something that we've reviewed in detail. We would have to do that. I'm certainly not going to speculate about what we might do in response to an action that has not yet been taken. I will just reiterate that when it comes to the decision to shutter Al Jazeera's operations,
right. They love us. They hate us for our freedom.
We support the work that journalists
freedom
and media
to lock up
do.
press that say
I don't think
shit
it's any
we don't
secret
like.
that we have had our differences with Al Jazeera over the years, including some of the ways in which they cover this conflict. But we support the free media conducting their operations everywhere in the world.
Yeah, I think most countries have had an issue with Al Jazeera. Let me ask you about Rafah. Now, the movement, 100,000 people and so on. Now, how many would need to move before Israel can go in and legitimately go after Hamas's position? I mean, the area is so small. Al-Mawasi, where they are moving and so on, just meters, maybe kilometers away. What would prevent, let's say, Hamas fighters or Hamas leaders and so on to actually move, to another place? They allegedly have a network of tunnels that would allow them to do that and so on. And then, we have the same kind of situation. We see the Israelis saying we want to go after them in that area. I mean, how do you read this whole situation?
So that is not really a question I can answer. I will just make clear, as I have already, and as others in the administration, including the president, including the secretary, have on a number of occasions, that a major operation in Rafah.
His job is just to wear them out.
And finally, I asked on Thursday about Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh. I was wrong. He wasn't shot. He died, and some say under torture and so on. I know that your colleague at the White House said what she said, that she was saddened and all these things. But have you followed up on this issue? How do you follow up on it? And because apparently they are keeping his corpse. I mean, they're not turning it to his family or others and so on for proper burial.
It is one that we have raised with the government of Israel. I don't have a response to read out. We have made clear with Israel, as we have made clear publicly, that they must treat all detainees humanely and with dignity in accordance with international humanitarian law, and that they must respect detainees' human rights, and also that they must ensure accountability for any abuses or violations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Matt. Since they took all the Al Jazeera questions, I'll skip mine.
No problem.
I just want to...
Alex, did you have something?
No.
Just
I just want to, because I'm a little bit confused, if you can clarify. So the Hamas response is not on the general's proposal. It's not accepting this proposal.
I think I made clear I'm not going to characterize their response one way or the other until we've had a chance to fully review it, digest it, discuss it with our partners.
All right. My second question is about the peer that the United States is conducting. We believe we have in our reporting that it is close to being operational. Can you just tell us how this peer will operate? I mean, who will have the upper hand in making this? So it is something that we have been trying to complete as soon as possible. And when I say we, I mean largely our colleagues at the Pentagon who are constructing the pier. We've been involved in liaising with humanitarian groups that will be involved in the distribution of humanitarian assistance once it comes in to Gaza.
But with the actual timeline for the launch of the pier and its operation, any details, I'm going to defer to the Pentagon to comment on those in any detail.
By the way, on the pier itself, it was said over the weekend that it was moved to June because of some high winds and waves and so on. Do you have any comment on that?
I'm going to defer to the Pentagon for any of those operational kind of details. They're the ones that are responsible for constructing and moving it and ultimately launching it. Michelle, go ahead. Do a few more in the Middle East before.
Did you ask Qatar to expel Hamas leaders from Doha, and is it the time for these leaders to leave?
I am not going to speak to private diplomatic conversations. As we have said a number of times, the Secretary in his conversations has made clear with a number of partners in the region that any relationship they have with Hamas, any influence they have with Hamas, they should use to make clear to Hamas that it needs to accept a ceasefire deal that includes the release of hostages. And he has also made clear publicly that at the end of this process, there can no longer be business as usual with Hamas as existed in too many places before October 7th. And I think I'll decline to comment any further.
Thank you.
Any more in the region? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. For World Press Freedom Day last week, the Secretary did put out a statement about that. I'm just curious as to why there was a decision not to mention the Gaza war. Granted that many journalists are being affected by a lack of press freedom around the world and also being killed in various conflicts, but there was a substantial number of journalists that were killed in Israel and Gaza at the end of last year. Was there a reason why that wasn't mentioned?
No, the Secretary has spoken to that a number of times, including in the region, including speaking directly to the colleagues of journalists in some instances who have lost their life tragically. We mourn the death of every journalist. You've heard the Secretary speak to the fact that it is because of journalists in Gaza that we see what's happening, that the world knows what's happening. And so we support their work. We want to see it continued. And we mourn the loss of every journalist and have spoken to that many times since the outbreak of this conflict.
Thank you.
Well, just one more on just on Kerem Shalom.
Yeah.
Is it your understanding that the Israelis have agreed to reopen it after the attack that happened on Sunday?
So yes, that was, if you looked at the readout from the president's call, it noted that the prime minister had agreed to open it in that conversation.
Okay, because, the secretary was just there on Wednesday. And you believe that Kerem Shalom is critical, with or without a Rafah operation.
Kerem Shalom is absolutely critical to the delivery of humanitarian assistance in Gaza, especially in southern Gaza, now that we've stood up operations in the north.
So is it open now, do you know?
I do not know if it's been reopened. I'll say.
So it doesn't seem like a genuine proposal from Hamas, because they've put stuff in
yesterday, knowing that Kerem Shalom
they
is
know
the
Israel
linchpin
can and won't
the delivery
agree
of
to it.
humanitarian assistance
But
in
they've
Gaza.
now managed
It goes
to
to this point we've made on a number
get
of
the
occasions
PR
that
who have been
Hamas
able to come
claims
out
that
and
they
say, we agreed to a
represent the
ceasefire.
interests of the Palestinian people, but when you see some of their actions,
that's
and we
what
talk about them hiding,
has happened for
hiding behind
decades now,
humans, using them
over
as human
these
shields all the
things
time,
between
when
the
you see them attacking the gate that
Palestinians
serves as the
and,
delivery point, as we
Israel.
saw, you were there last week, as we saw with our own eyes, the delivery point for humanitarian assistance into Gaza, it really does undermine any claim that they have to acting on the people of Gaza's behalf.
Thanks.
Can I switch regions?
I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Matthew. What actions would the U.S. take if Israel were to invade Rafah?
We have made clear that we cannot support an operation, and I don't want to speculate on what actions we might take if one should proceed.
Okay, and what's the department's reaction to Turkey suspending trade ties with Israel?
I don't have any comment on that. They are both allies of ours, and we would encourage them to work through their differences, but I don't have any specific comment.
And finally, what is the department doing to hold the CCP accountable for continued Chinese assistance to Russia's defense sector?
So you heard the Secretary speak to this when he was in China and made clear that China can't have it both ways. They can't claim to be a partner of Europe on the one hand and then continue to fund the greatest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. On the other hand, he raised this directly with President Xi. He raised it with Director and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and he made clear in those meetings that if China didn't act, we would. And a couple of updates to that. You saw us roll out additional sanctions on Chinese entities who have supported Russia's defense industrial base last week. And then I want to note that
military-industrial complex.
We made clear that it is not just the United States that is concerned about.
Okay, you've been listening to Matthew Miller, who's giving a briefing at the State Department. He's the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, so this is happening in Washington, D.C.
We're not really getting anything new offered up. Now it's time for the talking heads to earn their money.
States in this whole situation. We know that it has been complicit from the very beginning. But do you not think that more and more it is showing its real self, and that this could backfire on the American regime itself, as we're seeing an uprising in that country of the students basically and saying enough is enough?
Well, that's right. I mean, the pressure that there is now from the...
He's in Belfast and he's Scottish.
Across US campuses, including, of course, encampments in all the Ivy League campuses, all of which are amongst the richest universities in the US, all of which have significant investments either in Israeli arms firms or firms supplying the Israelis, or having direct connections with universities in the Zionist entity itself. These are all coming under pressure, and the pressure, of course,
the Zionism drinking game
protests is being felt by the White House. So that's something which they will not
right now.
be able to just
it looks
ignore.
like what we're going to get is just every talking head on everyone. Yep. So there we have it. There's been proposals by the Egyptians and Qataris. Hamas has agreed to it. The offers on the table. Well, truce or truth. That'll be interesting. I hate this guy.
Story very closely because the situation is tense to say the least. Well, let's go back to Rishi's problems over the weekend, Friday and throughout the weekend. I mean, when
guy can't say more than 2 words. Pro Gaza. Somebody has been elected who happens to be on one side of the argument. GB can't have that in their fascist mentality. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Get the idea. It's a 3-stage plan. It's been proposed. The first one, a temporary 40-odd day ceasefire. Each stage would be 40-odd days. Ultimately, like a permanent ceasefire and the re-establishment of trade. The reopening of the borders with Gaza. Which it's a game. Israel won't agree with that, because then they'll say that it gives Hamas the ability to rearm themselves. Anyway, significant news. Let's see what happens. I'm thinking Israel will walk in and have demolished Rafah later on the night and go, hey, and then maybe talk about a ceasefire again. 2 days' time. Get it? Got it. Good. Have a nice night, everybody. Good news.
Cips, clips. And remember, citizens, always subscribe. Hit the notification bell as well. And $19.95 plus shipping and handling will keep you out of hell.